She stood alone beneath a chandelier that glittered like frozen tears, a glass of champagne warming in her hand, while every whisper in the ballroom seemed to carve her name into the air. The bride of 3 months. The merchant's daughter who had bought a coronet with her father's fortune. Rosalind kept her shoulders straight and her smile steady, though her husband, Alexander Devereux, the Duke of Carrington, was waltzing with Lady Vivienne Hale, his widow's black silk replaced tonight by sapphire velvet. His hand rested at Vivienne's waist as if it had always belonged there. He had not looked at Rosalind once since the music began. She could feel the sympathy of the older matrons, the sly amusement of the young ladies who had hoped to catch the Duke themselves. A footman paused beside her with a tray, and she set down the untouched glass, her fingers trembling only slightly. She was not invisible. She was worse than invisible. She was the person everyone kindly pretended not to see. The waltz ended. Alexander bowed to Vivienne, and when he straightened, his gaze skimmed past his wife without a flicker of recognition. He excused himself and walked toward the card room, his dark head bent to listen to something Lord Ashby murmured. Rosalind's heart, which had been a bruised thing for weeks, gave a single weak pulse and went quiet. She would not cry. Not here. She had promised her father she would be happy. She had married for duty, yes, but she had also nursed a secret hope, a tender, foolish hope, that the Duke might one day see the woman behind the dowry. That hope felt like a child's fairy story now. She found her way to the terrace, the cold night air a relief against her flushed cheeks. The gardens of Carrington Park stretched into darkness, manicured and magnificent, and entirely foreign to a girl who had grown up among cotton mills and counting houses. She heard the click of heels and turned. Lady Vivienne, elegant and smiling, a fur wrap draped over her shoulders. "The Duchess looks chilled," Vivienne said, her voice smooth as cream. "Shall I send for your shawl?" Rosalind knew that tone. It was the tone of a woman who already occupied the place another was meant to fill. "You are very kind, Lady Vivienne, but I was only taking the air." Vivienne tilted her head. "Alexander has always adored these parties, though he pretends he does not. I danced with him at his first ball, you know. I was 17, he was 20. We were quite inseparable once." She let the words hang, then smiled as if she had said nothing of consequence. "Do enjoy the evening, Your Grace." She glided away, leaving the scent of gardenias and the sting of 1,000 unspoken claims. Rosalind gripped the stone balustrade until her knuckles ached. The Duke of Carrington had married her for money. Everyone knew it. The great house had been crumbling, the farms failing, the tenants struggling. Her dowry had saved Carrington. And now the Duke's old love had returned, husband dead, fortune intact, and perfectly willing to resume her place. What was a merchant's daughter to do but step aside gracefully? That night Rosalind undressed without the help of a maid and stood in her cold bedroom, the one separate from her husband, and looked at the small miniature she kept hidden in her jewelry box. She had painted it herself from memory, a foolish secret. His face, his serious gray eyes, the faint line between his brows. She had fallen in love with the Duke of Carrington long before the marriage contract was signed, at a summer fair 3 years ago when she had been just 18 and he had not known her name. He had helped her retrieve a tangled kite from an oak tree, laughing, his hands gentle on the string. She had given him a ribbon from her hair in thanks, a silly, girlish thing, and he had tucked it into his pocket and bowed as if she were a princess. He never knew she was the daughter of the richest manufacturer in the North. She had been too shy to tell him. And later, when her father's lawyers negotiated the match, she had hoped he remembered. He did not. On their wedding day, he looked at her as at a stranger, and she understood she was only a contract. Now, 3 months into a marriage that was no marriage at all, she decided to lay her hope to rest. She would do her duty. She would help his tenants, manage his household, and stop waiting by the window for a man who never came. Spring arrived, and with it a letter. Alexander strode into the morning room where Rosalind was reviewing ledgers, a sheet of paper in his hand. His presence filled the space like a storm front. "I have received word from the Home Office," he said without preamble. "There is unrest in the northern mills, your father's mills among others. They are sending a mediator, a barrister named Thomas Bennett. You knew him, I believe, in your youth." Rosalind looked up, her heart giving an unexpected lurch. Thomas, Tommy, with his freckles and his earnest smile, who had been her dearest friend until her father's ambition had moved them into higher circles. "Yes, I knew him. He was our neighbor's son. A good man." A shadow crossed the Duke's face there and gone. "He will be staying here at Carrington. The inn is full, and he is a representative of the Crown. I trust you can arrange suitable rooms." "Of course," she kept her voice calm. "I shall see to it personally." He hesitated as if about to speak again, then gave a curt nod and left. Rosalind pressed her fingers to her temple. Tommy Bennett. She had not seen him in 5 years, not since his father's death and his own departure for London to read law. He had written to her once, a long, careful letter, asking if she might ever think of him as more than a friend. She had answered gently, honestly, that her heart was otherwise engaged. She had never told him that her heart belonged to a duke she had met only once. That seemed the cruelest irony now. Thomas arrived on a gray afternoon, rain streaking the windows of the carriage, and when he stepped down at the great door, Rosalind saw the boy she remembered in the man he had become, broad-shouldered, his smile still quick and warm. He bowed over her hand. "Your Grace," he said, but his eyes held a familiar affection. "You look well." "And you, Mr. Bennett." She heard herself slip into formality, but then she saw the way his gaze softened and she could not help a genuine smile. "Welcome to Carrington." The Duke appeared in the hallway behind her. The air shifted. Rosalind sensed Alexander's stillness, that particular quiet that meant he was watching and judging. She made the introductions. The two men bowed, measured each other with the careful hostility of stags before a clash. Thomas was polite. The Duke was glacial. That evening at dinner, the conversation turned to the purpose of Thomas's visit. He spoke passionately of the workers' conditions, the long hours, the children in the mills. Rosalind listened, her heart aching for the families she remembered from her childhood, the women who had waved to her from their doorsteps. "I should like to help," she said quietly, "in whatever way I can." Thomas's expression warmed. "Your compassion was always your greatest gift, Rosa." The diminutive slipped out before he could catch it. The Duke's knife paused on his plate, a small, precise movement. He did not look up, but the temperature in the room dropped. Rosalind felt her cheeks flush. "My father's workers deserve justice," she said. "If I can advocate for them now, I will." Alexander set down his knife. "Your duties to Carrington must come first, madam. I will not have my duchess campaigning in the streets." "I did not suggest the streets," she replied, her voice even. "I suggested a voice." Thomas intervened smoothly. "Her Grace's perspective is invaluable, Duke. She knows these people. She was one of them in a sense." The words were kindly meant, but they landed like a gauntlet. Alexander's jaw tightened. "Her Grace is the Duchess of Carrington now. Her past is precisely that. Past." A long silence stretched. Rosalind placed her napkin on the table. "If you will excuse me, I find I am fatigued." She rose, and both men stood. She did not meet her husband's eyes. The following days settled into a careful rhythm. Thomas pursued his inquiries, often riding out to the mill villages and returning with stories of hardship. Rosalind found herself increasingly drawn into the work, writing letters, compiling reports, speaking to the wives of the local squires about charitable support. The occupation was a balm to her wounded spirit. For the first time since her wedding, she felt useful. She rose early, filled her hours with purpose, and fell into bed too tired to dwell on the cold distance across the hall. The Duke noticed the change. He noticed that the house no longer echoed with her soft footsteps hovering near his study, waiting to ask if he needed anything. He noticed that she no longer sat in the corner of the library while he read, a silent, hopeful presence. Now she was either out with Thomas, visiting a cottage hospital she was helping to fund, or locked in the morning room with piles of correspondence. The house felt emptier. He said nothing, But one evening he found himself standing in the doorway of the yellow salon, watching her. She was bent over a letter, her hair slipping from its pins, a smudge of ink on her wrist. She looked younger somehow and more distant. Her face held a quiet concentration that had nothing to do with him. He felt a sting he could not name. The first crack in his reserve came unexpectedly. Lord and Lady Ashby hosted a garden party, and Rosalind attended on her husband's arm, a beautiful shell. She wore pale green muslin and she smiled and made charming conversation, but Alexander felt the absence of her attention. She was with him physically, but her spirit was elsewhere. When Thomas Bennett arrived, late and apologetic, her whole face transformed. She laughed at something he said, a genuine, unguarded laugh that Alexander had never heard directed at himself. He stood aside, a glass of lemonade chilling his fingers, and watched his wife's hand rest on another man's sleeve. Jealousy rose in him, hot and unfamiliar. It was ridiculous. He had married her for duty, not love. He had been careful, polite, distant. He had given her no reason to expect affection. And yet the sight of her easy camaraderie with Thomas Bennett cut him like a blade. Lady Vivienne chose that moment to appear at his elbow. "Your Duchess seems quite recovered from her disappointment," she murmured. "Mr. Bennett is a fine figure of a man, is he not? And so attentive." Alexander's voice was ice. "My wife's friendships are her own affair." Vivienne laughed softly. "Of course. Still, the county notices things. A duke ought to be careful." He turned away from her, a dismissive gesture he would never normally make, and strode across the lawn. He had no plan, but when he reached Rosalind, he offered his arm with a formal stiffness. "I require a word with you, madam." Thomas stepped back politely, his expression unreadable. Rosalind took Alexander's arm and he led her away, beneath the canopy of a great oak. The spring leaves shivered overhead. "I do not wish to see you so publicly attached to Mr. Bennett," he said, his voice low and taut. "It gives rise to talk." Rosalind looked at him, and for the first time he saw no flicker of the old hurt in her eyes, only a steady, weary calm. "You have never cared for talk before, Your Grace. You have never cared for anything concerning me." The simple truth struck him silent. She withdrew her hand from his arm and walked back toward the gathering, her head high. Alexander stood beneath the tree, the taste of regret sharp on his tongue. He had wanted distance. Now he had distance, and it felt like falling. Days later, Rosalind discovered a secret. She had gone into the unused east wing of the house, looking for old linens to donate to the orphanage she was helping to establish. In a dusty attic room, she found a trunk with Alexander's initials. She knew she should not open it, but loneliness and curiosity overrode propriety. The lock gave way easily. Inside were letters, tied in faded ribbon, and a small watercolor sketch, a girl with a ribbon in her hair, standing beside an oak tree. Her breath caught. The girl was her. The ribbon was blue, the same shade she had worn at that long-ago summer fair. She stared at the image, her hands trembling. Beneath the sketch were pages of a journal, written in Alexander's sharp, angular hand. She read a few lines, her heart hammering. "I saw her again today, the girl with the ribbon. She does not know my name, but I know hers, Rosalind Trevelyan. I have made inquiries. Her father owns the mills, but she is not proud. She laughs like spring water. I am a duke with a failing estate, and I cannot court a merchant's daughter without seeming a fortune hunter. I must wait. I must find another way." She turned the pages. Months later, another entry. "My solicitor tells me her father seeks a title for his daughter. He would consider a match with Carrington. It is a solution. It is also the answer to a prayer I never dared pray. If she consents, I will make her happy. I will give her everything." And then, after the engagement, a single line. "She looked at me as if she did not know me. She does not remember the fair. I am a stranger to her. I am only a contract." Rosalind pressed her hand to her mouth. He had remembered. All this time he had remembered, and he had believed she had forgotten. The coldness, the distance, was not rejection. It was self-protection. He had married the woman he loved and thought she felt nothing. The revelation trembled through her, a painful, hopeful ache. She sat among the dust and cobwebs, the journal in her lap, and realized that the man who had seemed so indifferent had been nursing a wound as deep as her own. But the wall between them, built of silence and misunderstanding, still stood. He had never told her. He had let her believe she was only a transaction. And now she did not know if the love in those pages still lived, or if he had smothered it beneath duty and disappointment. The next public event was a dinner at Carrington, arranged for the local gentry to welcome Thomas Bennett and hear his findings. The great table gleamed with silver and candlelight. Rosalind, seated at the foot, performed her role flawlessly, but Alexander, at the head, watched her with a new, covert intensity. Since the garden party, something had shifted. He had begun to notice the small things he had missed before: the way she bit her lip when concentrating, the softness of her voice when she spoke to a servant, the weary set of her shoulders at the end of the day. He saw her compassion, her quiet strength, and the respect she was quietly earning from his tenants and neighbors. And he saw the way Thomas Bennett looked at her, with a gentle, patient devotion that made Alexander's chest constrict. After the ladies withdrew, the men remained with their port. Thomas spoke honestly about the mill conditions. The owners must improve safety and shorten hours for children. It is not only a matter of law but of humanity. Her Grace has been instrumental in gathering testimonies. Without her, I could not have made this case. The other gentlemen murmured approval. Alexander's hand tightened around his glass. Her Grace. She had been his wife for months, and he had not known she possessed such influence, such fire. He had relegated her to the margins, and she had quietly built a life that had no need of him. When the guests departed, he found her in the library, staring at the fire. She did not turn as he entered. "You were magnificent tonight," he said, the words clumsy because they were true, and because he had never said such a thing to her before. She looked at him then, her expression unreadable. "I did what was needed, as a duchess should." He took a step closer. "Rosalind, I have been remiss." A flicker of surprise crossed her face, but she quickly masked it. "You have been exactly what our contract required, Your Grace. You have been courteous and distant. I have no complaints." The word contract landed like a blow. He flinched. "That is not, I never meant for you to be unhappy." "I am not unhappy," she said quietly. "I have found my purpose. I am grateful for that." She was telling the truth. He could see it. She was no longer the hopeful, wounded girl who had stood alone at the wedding ball. She had become a woman who did not need him. The realization terrified him. "I would like to try again," he said, his voice rough. "To begin anew." For a long moment she searched his face. Then she shook her head slightly, not in refusal but in confusion. "Why now, Alexander? Because I am no longer waiting by your door. Because another man sees my worth." The words were a mirror. He could not deny them. "Because I am a fool," he said, "because I have been blind." She rose from her chair, her gown rustling. "I found the trunk in the east wing. I read your journal. I know you remembered the fair. I know you loved me, or thought you did, once." Her voice broke on the last word. "Why did you never tell me? I waited for you, every day. I thought you had married me only for my dowry, and I would have given you every penny just to see you smile at me the way you smiled at Vivienne." The name hung in the air. Alexander closed his eyes. "Vivienne is nothing. She was a friend a long time ago. I danced with her that night because I was a coward. I wanted to make you jealous, to provoke some reaction that proved you cared. I did not understand that your silence was grief, not indifference." He opened his eyes, and they were bright with unshed emotion. "I have ruined everything." Rosalind looked at him, and the tears she had held back for months finally spilled. "You did not ruin everything, but you broke something. I do not know if it can be mended by a few honest words." He reached for her hand, and she let him take it, though she did not return the pressure. "Then let me try," he whispered. "Let me earn your trust. I will wait, however long it takes." She pulled her hand gently free and wiped her cheeks. I need time. I need to understand the man I thought I married, and I need you to understand that I am no longer the girl who would settle for crumbs." She walked past him and out the door. The following weeks were a strange, tentative dance. Alexander did not press. He began to appear in the morning room with a cup of tea, asking quietly about her work. He rode out to the mill villages himself and stood in the mud, speaking to families, his immaculate boots forgotten. He sent Vivienne a polite but firm letter explaining that his duchess required his full attention, and she would be welcome only as a family friend. Vivienne departed for London, her smile a little thinner. Thomas Bennett watched these developments with a careful, measuring eye. One afternoon he found Rosalind in the garden cutting roses. "He is trying," Thomas said, leaning against the sundial. "I have never seen a duke so humbled." Rosalind snipped a stem. "He is trying." "And you," Thomas asked gently, "do you still love him?" She paused. "I have loved him since I was 18. I do not think love disappears, but it can become buried under so much pain that you cannot feel it anymore. I am digging for it, Tommy. I just do not know what I will find." Thomas nodded slowly. "I would have waited for you, you know. I would have waited forever, but I think your heart was never mine to wait for." He smiled, a little sadly. "He is a fortunate man if he has the sense to realize it." The moment of jealousy that Alexander should have felt did not come, because he saw only the grace in Thomas's farewell. The barrister completed his mission and departed, shaking the Duke's hand with a mutual respect that surprised them both. The turning point came on a rain-lashed evening. Rosalind had ridden out to a remote tenant farm to deliver medicine to a sick child and had not returned by nightfall. Alexander, packing the hall, felt a fear unlike anything he had ever known. He shouted for horses, ignored the protests of his grooms, and rode out into the storm, his heart a drumbeat of terror. He found her on the flooded lane, her horse lamed, her cloak soaked, her face pale but determined as she tried to lead the animal to safety. He dismounted in the mud, grasped her shoulders. "Are you hurt? Are you injured?" "I am fine," she gasped. The horse slipped. He pulled her against him, a fierce, desperate embrace, rain streaming over both of them. "I thought I had lost you," he said into her wet hair, "when you did not come home. I thought, Rosalind, I cannot lose you. I will not survive it." She held herself stiff for a heartbeat, then her hands came up and clutched the wet wool of his coat. "I am here," she whispered. "I am here." They rode back together, his arm around her waist, and that night in the warm glow of the library fire, wrapped in blankets, the last walls began to crumble. He knelt beside her chair and took her hands. "I have been the worst of husbands. I offered you a title and gave you loneliness. I have no right to ask for your heart, but I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve it. I love you, Rosalind. I loved you from the first moment I saw you tangled in that ridiculous kite string, and I have loved you every day since, even when I was too proud and too afraid to show it." She looked at him, at the lines of strain and sincerity etched on his handsome face, and felt the buried love stir, break through the soil of her hurt and reach for the light. "I believed I was invisible to you," she said. "I believed my love was a burden. Now I see you were carrying your own invisible weight." She touched his cheek. "I am tired of being strong alone, Alexander. I want to be strong with you." He turned his head and pressed a kiss into her palm. "Then let me be your strength. Let me prove that your faith was not misplaced." The healing came not in a single moment, but in the small miracles that followed. He began to join her at the orphanage, reading to children with a gentleness that made her throat ache. She began to accompany him on estate business, her sharp mind and practical suggestions earning his genuine admiration. They spoke, finally, of the years of silence, of the fair, of the ribbon she had given him that he still kept in a locked drawer. He brought it out one evening, faded blue silk, and she laughed through tears. "I thought you had thrown it away," she said. "I kept it like a talisman," he confessed. "I was too proud to wear it, but I could not part with it." The county watched the transformation with astonishment. The Duke of Carrington, once so cold, was now seen walking arm in arm with his duchess through the village, listening to her with an intensity that bordered on reverence. She blossomed, her quiet confidence turning into a radiant warmth that drew people to her. The whispers changed from pity to envy. On the anniversary of their wedding, he gave her a new ribbon, deep rose silk, and tied it himself around her wrist. "I will not ask you to forget the lonely year," he said, "but I will give you a lifetime of better ones if you will let me." She looked up at him, her heart so full it seemed to press against her ribs. "I did not marry the man I loved," she said. "I married a stranger who held my heart in his hands without knowing it. Now I think I am finally meeting my husband." He cupped her face, his gray eyes tender. "And I am meeting my wife, the woman who was never invisible. She was only waiting for me to open my eyes." The kiss they shared was gentle, a promise more than a passion, but it sealed a covenant. In the garden of Carrington Park, under the same oak where he had first seen her, they began again. Months passed. The orphanage flourished, the mills improved, and the Duke and Duchess became known not only for their rank but for their partnership. They still had moments of doubt, echoes of old pain that surfaced on sleepless nights, but they faced them together. He learned to speak his fears. She learned to voice her needs. And in the slow, steady rhythm of shared days, they built a marriage that was not a transaction but a sanctuary. One summer evening they sat on the terrace, watching the sky fade to violet. She was reading aloud from a letter, and he was listening with a half-smile. She paused and looked at him. "Do you ever think about the year we lost?" she asked. He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Every day. And every day I use the memory to remind myself never to take you for granted." He lifted her hand to his lips. "I loved you too late, but I will love you well." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "It is not too late," she said. "Love cannot be measured by calendars. It can only be lived." The stars came out, one by one, and the Duke and Duchess of Carrington sat in a comfortable silence that held more meaning than 100 grand pronouncements. The pain had not vanished. It had been transformed into a deeper understanding, a gratitude for the journey that had brought them here. They were no longer two separate people circling each other in a cold dance. They were partners, friends, and lovers, bound by a ribbon that time and tears had only strengthened. In the morning they would wake and do the small, ordinary things that make a life. They would discuss estate accounts and argue gently over wallpaper for the nursery they hoped to fill. They would walk to the village and listen to the children reciting their lessons. They would be a duchess who knew her worth and a duke who had learned humility. And every night before they slept, he would whisper against her hair, "I see you, Rosalind, I see you." And she would answer, "And I see you." That was enough. That was everything. The story of the Duke of Carrington and his merchant bride became a quiet legend, not of grand tragedy, but of quiet redemption. It was whispered at firesides, passed from mother to daughter, a tale that reminded every listening heart that love, when lost in silence, can sometimes find its voice again. And the house that had once echoed with loneliness now rang with laughter, the best and truest music of all. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Also, let us know in the comments which country you're watching from. Your support means a lot to us. Thank you for watching and see you in the next amazing story.